Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Beaver and today we are celebrating 1 year on YouTube. To celebrate this occasion, I decided to do a recipe that I've been looking forward to for many years. That is to make a single malt whiskey. And not any single malt whiskey, but a peated single malt whiskey. Once again, a great supporter of the channel, Prohibition Home Brewers, was kind enough to send us some of their specialty grains, their heavily peated Scottish malted barley. Now, I was really excited when the package arrived with 5 kilograms of that malted barley. First thing I did is had a big ass sniff of what was in the bag. And yeah, first time ever smelling peated barley. I was quite surprised about the flavor that came out of the bag and yeah, what peat actually smells like. Now I've had it in whiskies before, but it smells nothing like the actual product. So yeah, if you want to get your hands on some of that specialty malts that they have over there at Prohibition Home Brewers, link will be down in the description and you can just click on that one and pop over there and pick up a bag. Now in front of us we have the Kutch jars from the run we did with the peated, heavily peated Scottish malt. But before we talk about the cuts, let's first go into the process of making our whiskey. First up, we started by grinding up the grains. Now unfortunately we had a bit of a camera error when that happened, but yeah, it was just the basic process of grinding up the grains. I used a blender to get the grains nice and fine. Now as you'll see on the screen right now, we ended up with a nice big pot of the malted but ground up barley. We then proceeded to heat up the strike water. After we hit our strike temperature for our barley, we then proceeded to add the barley into the water cup by cup, continuously stirring, maintaining the temperature to ensure that we have a very efficient mash and convert as much of those starches into sugars as possible, because I didn't want to waste any of the grains. We then proceeded to drain off our distiller's beer from the actual grain by continuously rinsing the grains with the wash from the bottom of the kettle or the mash tun. We then in turn sparged out the sugars left over in the grains and continued doing that up until we had 20 liters of our distiller's beer for the single malt whiskey. Now, being as frugal as I am and not wanting to waste any piece or any little bit of sugar left over in the grains, I decided then to take the grains, dump them into a bucket, filled it up with some lukewarm water, gave it a nice little stir, waited till pitching temperature and pitched yeast in both the distiller's beer as well as that wash where we had all the grains that we did the mash in with to create the wort in a bucket. We let those ferment out. It took 7.5 days, 8 days for the wash to completely ferment out. Left it for a few days more so it just clarifies and clears out a little bit. We then, the day before distillation day, took the grains and filtered them out. We once again used that Delica Brew grain basket. We put a pillowcase on the inside of it, dumped the grains in there and allowed it to sit overnight, covered in a black bag so no buggies can get in there, and let it drain out completely. We then added everything into the boiler and started the distillation process. I used my technique where I compress the heads and the hearts and the tails. If you want to see a video on that, link will be up here in the card on how I compress my heads, hearts and tails to make sure that I have a nice clean hearts cut. Now for this run here, we did not actually use that reflux to compress the tails because I wanted to catch some tails in the single malt distillation, because on a whiskey you tend to get some of your more desirable flavors down in the tails. So yeah, this run started off at 64%, nice and low, so we had as much flavor as possible. We took the 4 shots in the heads off, if anybody asks, at about 94%. 63%, and then yeah, dropped the run down to about 64%, kept it there, running all the way down to a 44% on jar number 9. The smells that came off the still while we were running it was nice and sweet, transitioned into some apricot flavors, and ended up with a nice deep grain flavor around about in the middle of the run. And then right here in the end of the run, we started to catch that peat smoke, and I was really excited about that. So yeah, this is the run we ended up with. What I'm going to do now is just quickly blend this all together, and then we'll do a final taste of the product, give you guys feedback on how we went from grain to glass on this white whiskey, a single malt white whiskey. And with the blending of the cut jars now all done and dusted, what you saw me do there on camera was take jar number 1, put it aside first off, and then what we did is we added the majority of the hearts cut into our keeps jar over here. But what I also did is added some of those tails flavors in there. You also saw me rubbing my hands together with some alcohol in it and sniffing it. What that does is it evaporates off everything, and it leaves the heavier flavors behind. And then with those tails jars, what I did is I smelt where I had the most amount of peat come through, and I added little bits of that into the final cuts jar or the final aging jar over here. What I also then proceeded to do is used up the rest of those tails, because they're not bad smelling. There was no funky or bad smells coming off of that like you normally get with your tails. It was just that nice deep rich peat smell coming through with some of those fruit characters you normally get from a barley. I then proceeded to add a little bit of jar number 1 into the final jar, and then same into jar number 2 here, where we ended up with 800 mils at 50% of that nice deep rich peat smoke tails with a tiny bit of the very sweet first cut. Before we get into the final tasting of the 2 blends that I made here, one that is predominantly hearts and the one that has quite a bit of tails in it, I'm going to leave the aging up to you guys. What I'm going to do is over on the community page, I will be adding a poll on that side there with the different types of wood that I have access to, as well as a comment section where if you feel that we need to do a multiple wood aging on this very special single malt whiskey, for me at least, I'll put a comment section down below as well where you can put down a aging schedule if you feel that we need to use different types of wood for this very special single malt that we made celebrating 1 year on YouTube. Before we get into the final tasting and giving you tasting notes on the 2 cuts we did there, what I want to do is thank everybody for their support on the channel for the last year. It has truly been an amazing experience, and I've been enjoying every single moment, enjoy every comment, replying to the comments, getting back to you guys, the emails and the kind words. I've really been enjoying it. And here in South Africa, it's tradition that when you are celebrating something, you celebrate it with some champagne. So on everybody that has supported the channel, has subscribed to the channel, sent a comment, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And yeah, cheers to you guys. cheers to everyone. Now for the moment everybody's been waiting for, the tasting of the final blend that we have in front of us. Remember, head over to the community page where you have a say on what we're going to age this on. So the first one we're going to start with is the one with the more muted flavors with a tiny bit of the tails mixed in. And yeah, let's just give it a quick nudge. Keeping in mind this is sitting at 55%. Immediately on the nose you get that new make grain smell. Very sweet, very flavorful. And a tiny bit of that peat smoke coming through. On the taste, it starts off very sweet. It then tapers into a nice fruity flavor and then ends off with that very smoky, like cigarette ash smoky flavors on the back of your tongue. And then as you exhale, that peat smoke comes through and you can taste that nice, almost burnt sugar kind of sweetness from that smoke coming through. So yeah, very nice single malt, unaged single malt. Now for our jar that has predominantly the tails in it, and in those tails you could smell the peat smoke. On this one here you couldn't really get that peat coming through as much. So let's quickly taste this one. On this one it's a lot less sweet on the nose, more earthy, more almost potatoey, when you're roasting potato type of smell. A lot heavier hit on the smoke, not as much on the peat side, that almost like I said, that burnt kind of sugar type of smell. On the flavor, starts off with that deep rich peat smoke, ends in that ashtray type of smoke, and then the sweetness is the thing that comes last on the tail side. So yeah, the reason why I split these two jars and the reason why I want you guys to vote on it is maybe tell us what to do with each of these two jars. What I was thinking was to leave this as a white spirit and then blend it back into the aged spirit at the end of the aging process, so we can bring some of that peat smoke, that raw peat smoke flavor back into the aged spirit. It's completely up to you guys over on the community section what we are going to be aging this on. And remember, if you want to, put a comment down below where you suggest what we do with either one of these two jars. We'll call this main jar 1 and we'll call this secondary jar. So yeah, head over to the community page and start voting on what wood we're going to be aging this on. Now, to make sure that we don't have any bad luck in our lives, I will take a sip of the champagne now. So cheers to everyone. Thank you very much for sticking around to the end and have a lucky day.